Hi, it's Jon Cronshaw here from Indie Author Mastermind. Today I have another guest. I am joined by Paddy Finn. Now, Paddy Finn is an indie author and indie games publisher. He writes science fiction, fantasy, and designs content for Dungeons and Dragons and other tabletop RPGs. He enjoys playing Dungeons and Dragons and trotting the globe with his family, something they document on their Faraway Family YouTube channel. So, Paddy, welcome to the show.
Right, John, thanks for having me. Good to be here.
And how are you? How are you doing?
Yeah, okay. Crazy busy. We're in the middle of a Kickstarter, so very timely when it comes to this discussion, and lots of stuff going on. And what about yourself?
Yeah, just writing. Started this new fantasy project, so I'm just kind of getting into that and trying to finish the book 2 of my Assassin series. So it's going. It's just I feel like there's a bit of lack of focus at the moment with my writing, so I'm just trying to force myself to do that. So that's good. What I wanted to talk to you about today is, you mentioned the Kickstarter thing. I mean, that is something a lot of authors are talking about at the moment. But I also want to talk about something cool that you've been doing, which is you're doing indie publishing, but it's in a bit of a different way. And this is quite interesting to me. It's the kind of the Dungeons and Dragons element. And I'm just kind of want to kind of pick your brains a bit on how that works. So I suppose where I want to start is asking you, like, why Dungeons and Dragons? Why did you start with that?
Oh, that's a great question. Where do I even begin? So I've always wanted to play Dungeons and Dragons ever since I've been a kid. I knew about it, I heard about it, saw the cartoon, and then especially when I first played Final Fantasy as a kid, and then I heard there was this thing like Dungeons and Dragons. It was like a tabletop version of something like that. And when I first played Final Fantasy, it was so story driven, and I just completely fell in love with it and wanted to do anything that was even remotely similar. And because I was in I'd say, a very conservative environment at the time, there was the whole satanic panic thing that people are sort of maybe familiar with, where Dungeons and Dragons is all about demons and devil worship, which of course it has nothing to do with any of those things. But I was dissuaded, or let's say I wasn't allowed to play it at the time. Fast forward, I'm now an adult. I'm an indie publisher, author, and I've put that past behind me, and I found myself in a position where a bunch of people are looking to play this game, and I'm like, yeah, I've always wanted to play it. Decided to play it. It was about 4 or 5 years ago. Met a group of strangers who I met online locally at a gaming store. It was everything I expected and more in terms of this beautiful collaborative storytelling experience. And I've been hanging out regularly with that same group, playing the same game ever since.
Wow. Okay. So it's like the same extended campaign. That's
yeah. It's actually it's coming to. Normally campaigns wouldn't take so long, but because we're also busy, we don't play once a week. We play kind of once a month, or every other week, or just whenever we can. We have an online Google sheet where we arrange times and work around each other's schedules. But normally you would finish these things much quicker, but this has gone on for so long because we just don't get to meet as frequently. But it should be wrapping up in the next month or two, and it's kind of working in well with me moving to another country, so kind of handy.
Yeah, well, it sounds like you're moving to somewhere quite nice, so well done on that. So we with the Dungeons and Dragons thing, I mean, I've not played it myself, but I do write campaigns with my friend. So my friend, he plays the Dungeons and Dragons, he's a DM, and I've been helping him kind of craft different characters, different situations, different missions, that kind of thing. So there's a lot of fun, a lot of creativity in that. And I think it does kind of hit that thing for me of bouncing ideas off someone and going, oh no, but what about this? What about this? So it's definitely a lot of fun. And, especially if you're writing as a solo author, just it's a very different creative experience. So that's cool. So I suppose what I want to ask you about is you've basically monetized. Is it that campaign, or is it just kind of general Dungeons and Dragons kind of stuff? I mean, how did you kind of go from being someone who's never played it to someone who is in a campaign to someone who's now doing books and whatever it is you're doing?
Yeah. Yeah, it's another good one. So when I discovered Dungeons and Dragons, or should I say rediscovered it, or was in a position to actually do something about playing that game, I'd already been working full time as an indie author for a number of years, so I was sort of in the process of getting that up and running. I left my job to start doing that, so I left a full time, a lucrative uh, IT career to sort of jump off into the deep end in the indie side of things, and it was really scary at the time. And then Dungeons and Dragons came along and helped me through a lot of tough times as well. So, I already had this thing. I had a passion for writing and telling stories, and that's why I wanted to be, an indie author. And I published a bunch of books and really enjoyed that. And then when it came to Dungeons and Dragons, I just fell more and more in love with it. Became so much more passionate about it. It was like storytelling on steroids. And I wanted to just, it's not that I wanted to monetize it, it just seemed like the natural step, because it was already doing that with other things that I really enjoyed. And like they say that you should, if you want to make a business out of something, it has to be something you're passionate about, which I was. And one thing just led to another. And it's actually completely disconnected from my indie author novels. So, I spent a few years doing the indie author novels, and then in the middle of that, it just a hard pivot off to the Dungeons and Dragons side of things, which was early last year, early 2021. I had been working up to it for about 6 months prior to that, but we launched our first campaign in early 2021, and nothing to do with anything else. It was just like a small tester, like a little magazine, which ended up growing into a book. Bit of scope creep happened there. It was supposed to be 12 pages long, and ended up being 112 pages. And we launched that as a tester because I had this idea for a much bigger one, a much bigger book, a much bigger campaign, but I wanted to launch a little tiny one first to make sure I made most of my mistakes on that, and didn't make all of them on the big campaign that I wanted to be a big success.
So is that what it is then? It's basically is it like a guide for Dungeon Master kind of thing? Is that what you're producing?
Essentially, like we produce something called Mag of Holding, which anyone who plays Dungeons and Dragons will be familiar with the Bag of Holding, which is like a Mary Poppins bag. You can just put loads of stuff in there. So number one, we thought, well, I thought at the time that was a really clever pun and a really, cool marketing ploy. I was very quickly proven wrong because it was a branding mistake, which we're working our way through now and rebranding that. But anyway, we produced this thing called Mag of Holding, and what it was, every quarter we're going to release this 100-page supplement for Dungeons and Dragons, and it would have a bunch of options for players as well. But mainly, it's got a ton of stuff in here for Dungeons and Dragons. So the first one, for example, was we released it around winter time, and it was Winter Wasteland. So if you're going to run a game that's set in the Arctic, environment, or during winter, or there's going to be snow monsters or elementals, this is the kind of book you want to reach for, because it's going to have new monsters you can use in that kind of environment. It's going to have maps and adventures and magic items and NPCs, stuff like that. So it's essentially, yeah, it's a Dungeon Master's toolkit.
Cool. So are you work? I mean, you said we. I don't know whether you were, the royal we, or whether you've got a team of people who were working on this. So who is it working on this? Have you got like illustrators, or are you bringing in cover designers and things like that, or how's it working?
Yeah, yeah, I've just naturally grown accustomed to saying we a lot because it is a team, right? Obviously, I kind of head up the team. I have creative control over how everything happens, and I decide, make all the important decisions. But it's, if you think about it, like even as an indie author, somebody who's just writing a novel, say just writing a novel, it's not just, obviously, but writing a novel is is itself a really big undertaking, right? And you don't always, we tend to think of creators like novelists or artists or whatever as a solitary occupation, and for the most part it is, but there is actually a team element that we sometimes overlook, which is you do have your editor, your cover designer, if you have someone doing some marketing for you, running your social media, there is a bit of a team element there. Maybe it's not a focus, but when you move into the Dungeons and Dragons space, if you look at a publication, it is full of art and beautiful graphics, and there are mechanics. It's not just story. There is lore, there is narrative, there's a lot of balancing rules and numbers as well. So you need a collection of people who are good at those different things if you want to make it work. And I don't even know how. I'm very fortunate to have an amazing team. I don't know how it happened, but I have an amazing team, and I'm just really fortunate.
That's awesome. So are these people you've got as like freelancers, or is it like you've just kind of networked, and how are you working with them to kind of put this thing together?
It's a bit of both, really. So we I didn't really have that much of a team to begin with. It was just me doing all the writing and the mechanics, and then I reached out to the odd illustrator or artist here and there and said, look, can you paint this monster for me or paint this magic item, and then I would do all of the graphics and stuff myself, which when I started I was terrible at graphics. I've improved a great deal, still not great, but back in the day I was abysmal. But we so it was me and an artist or two, and then I put out some like beta reading material. I was like, guys, here's what I'm making. Can you guys, a bunch of people, can you have a look at it? Let me know what you think. Give me some feedback. And one guy came along and went, look, here's this 65-page document you've created. Here are all the mistakes on it. And I was like, I don't have time to go and actually correct all that. Can you do it? And he was like, yeah. So I give him an InDesign document because it was all put together in InDesign or InDesign license rather. He went into InDesign, he fixed everything, and he's now become like one of our main guys when it comes to game design, just because it was like a networking thing that just happened naturally. Then there are obviously, I do go out of my way to look for illustrators, and a graphic designer is a guy I grew up with, good friends with him, and I approached him. He knows nothing about Dungeons and Dragons, or rather, he didn't. He does now, and that's worked very well. And yeah, just a combination of just things naturally occurring along the way, and going out and finding the right people.
Awesome. So, I mean, obviously, you've mentioned. I mean, I take it these are all funded through Kickstarter campaigns. Is that how you're getting these out to fans or whatever?
Yeah, that's the main focus right now for the Penny Dragon Games side of the business. We'll launch a Kickstarter once we have an idea, and if people are or think it's a great idea, they're going to back it and fund it, and then that gives us the resources to actually put it together and get it printed and fulfilled and into people's hands. And there's something really interesting. I mean, I don't know how much you want me to go into the process or anything like that here.
Yes,
But
I mean, as deep as you want to go, really, because I think this is thing. It's like we could talk in around stuff, but I think if there's stuff that listeners can get from this, where it's like, okay, this is how I do it. Okay, I didn't realize before. Then yeah, go ahead.
yeah. Well, anyone listening, like, I know we're talking about Dungeons and Dragons specifically, but Kickstarter is such a powerful tool. I did a panel at the Dublin Comic Con a few weeks back, and a bunch of people were talking about doing a computer game. I said, look, try and get a demo and launch it on Kickstarter, and then later on do the main project. Or it could be a graphic novel, it could be a product, it could be anything. But we just happen to be using Kickstarter as a vehicle for our Dungeons and Dragons creative company, and it's working really well. So it does become a very much a we do everything in Kickstarter. Now we do want to get away from that a bit. We will always use Kickstarter, I imagine, but we do want to set things up where we're selling product on our website, on Amazon, we just set up a partnership with a big distribution company in the United States. They help a lot of indie publishers like myself get on board and get into the retailing side of things, which isn't something I ever imagined myself doing. Being an indie author, you tend to move away from the bricks and mortar side of things, and you focus on ebooks and Amazon and the other platforms. But I've kind of like the longer I've done this, the more I see the benefits of the brick and mortar store side of things in the tabletop RPG community. It's still a big thing, but something that a lot of people don't realize this is, let's say 1,000 people come along, or not 1,000 people, let's say 600 people come along and say, yes, Paddy, we're going to back your book we love Dungeons and Dragons. We love what you're doing. Here is, $40, and they each give me $40 to put this project together. Now that means I have to, create the book and then go off and physically print it somewhere. You can do print on demand. We don't do that because the margins are way too small and the quality is not comparable to offset printing. So we usually do offset printing. But what that means is you can't really get an order less than 1,000 copies. You can, but it's going to be, it doesn't make any financial sense because, 1,000 copies is kind of like where it becomes financially viable or cheap enough that it makes sense. If you get 500 copies, you could do that, but it's going to cost per copy. It's going to cost you a lot more than if you got ordered 1,000. Now, what happens there is you only had 600 people who wanted the book on the Kickstarter. You now have 1,000 copies of the book. What do you do with the extra 400? Well, you go sell them somewhere else on your website, on Amazon, wherever. So not only does the Kickstarter fund the Kickstarter project itself, it also helps you, fund things in the future. Let's say it has a knock-on effect.
Yeah, that makes sense. So it's almost giving you like an inventory to sell. That's cool. So are you selling these then at, like you mentioned, the Comic-Con the other day? Is that the kind of places where you'll go, or is it a case of selling them by hand to shops or things like that?
Yeah, we haven't really. We did mean to start using conventions a lot this year as a means of selling things, but we just didn't really. Things took a bit of a turn, and we didn't end up getting to do that. So we didn't sell anything at Dublin Comic Con. That was just us going down and doing hosting a panel on game design. So, but we do plan on doing a lot of convention stuff next year, maybe end of this year, and of course there will be an element of selling our product while we're there, but mostly it's just reaching out to distribution people who understand the retailing side of things, and then they'll kind of like set up a distribution pipeline where we send them 100 books, and then they'll find 100 places to put those books. So they'll find a retailer who owns a store somewhere in the States, and that retailer wants to purchase 10 of them because he thinks he can sell 10 and whatever, et cetera, et cetera.
That's cool. So yeah, I mean, it does sound like a very different, almost more involved kind of business model than the kind of indie author. Yeah, going, especially if you're just on Amazon and yeah, KU only, whatever.
Yeah, and the great thing is, I think there's, I've kind of mentioned this a few times to people, but there's a lot of potential, and I'm going to do something and going full circle. So I'm going to go back to the indie side of things, the indie author, should I say, the writing novels. Number one, like I need to write novels to keep myself sane. Number two, I just love doing it, and number three, there is this opportunity, I believe, that people aren't really tapping into right now. I mean, Brandon Sanderson is an example of someone tapping into what I've been trying to work towards, and that is building an audience that enjoy your stuff, who will, also buy your novels. So the great thing about the Dungeons and Dragons community is a lot of them read fantasy. So we are working on several series of fantasy novels that are set in parts of the IPs that we're creating in Dungeons and Dragons. So hopefully it will appeal to those people who are invested in Dungeons and Dragons side of things, but it's not specifically Dungeons and Dragons, it's just its own world. So to just anyone walking into these novels, they're just picking up another novel and reading it.
That's cool then. Yeah. So I mean, I'm just wondering actually, just because of, I suppose, the intellectual property side of things, is like, how does it work with using an existing IP like Dungeons and Dragons? I mean, is it almost like open source, or kind of royalty free, or do you have to kind of get a license? How does that work?
Okay, so Dungeons and Dragons, so Wizards of the Coast, the people who own Dungeons and Dragons, they're owned by Hasbro, the toy company. They produce something called the Open Gaming License. So the OGL, it's just a one-page document. It's like a bunch of legal jargon. It says, here are the things you can do, here are the things you can't. And to be honest with you, there's very little you can't do. Now, it's very important that you abide by those rules. It's like you can't use the term Dungeons and Dragons. You can't use certain other terminology or things that are very specific to their brand identity. But essentially, it's like it's free. It's like here is our standard release document, and inside the standard release document, it's a huge book size document. And it's like, here's all the stuff you can use that we have created. It includes all the rules, lots of the monsters, all the other stuff. And then, anything you create on top of it is just your own stuff, right? So they are very good in allowing you so much freedom as a creator to create your own stuff. And I think that's one of the reasons it's become so popular, is they've allowed that breathing room and that space for the creative people who play the game to just create their own stuff and put it out there. And that has kind of helped become a bit of an advertisement and added to a lot of the momentum of the game growing over the last few years.
Yeah, that does sound very cool. That's great, actually. Yeah, I love that. That is a very forward-thinking attitude by the Dungeons and Dragons people, for sure. That's that's almost like Creative Commons kind of thing, isn't it? That's what that reminds me of. Yeah, that's excellent. So I was just wondering whether you'd be able to talk us through what a Kickstarter campaign actually looks like for you. Like, how do you go about setting one up? How do you go about marketing them? I mean, I'd take it's going to be a lot different to selling a book, marketing in that kind of respect.
Yes and no. I mean, like what I'm about to say here can apply to nearly any product you're going to create. So number one is mailing list. No, I'm not going to say that's number one. Number one is having your own audience. You need to bring an audience to the table with you. If you don't already have one, then you should start a very small Kickstarter and have zero expectations, and that'll help you start your little tiny audience, and then you can grow, from there. But it helps if you bring your own audience. Now that the question then becomes, how do you build your own audience? Well, that's a completely different question related to marketing itself. But I would say, if you had to choose one thing, go for your mailing list. I'm a big believer in mailing lists. They are the most powerful tool for us in driving a successful launch in the first 48 hours on Kickstarter, which is like a very important window. But what the process is something like this: you kind of come up with an idea of something you think people are going to invest in, a cool idea of a product or a book or whatever. You want to be able to put together like a preview, some art, some samples of some prototypes, whatever. Something tangible people can see and buy into. It can't just be like this ethereal idea that doesn't have any substance to it. You have to have some substance. So if it's going to be a novel, for example, have a few chapters ready, have the book cover ready, have maybe a few bits of character art, a few sketches, a map, stuff like that. If it's Dungeons and Dragons, same thing. And you would go into Kickstarter, create an account, get your ID approved, and then submit your idea for approval. And the approval process can take anywhere from like a second to a few days. And generally what will happen is, once you've put in a bunch of details and Kickstarter goes, yep, this is great, you can generate something which is called a pre-launch link. And it's best to think of that as like what's called a pre-order link on Amazon, right? The book hasn't been released yet, but it's coming out in a few months or whatever, and you can buy it or you can follow it. Now, with the Kickstarter pre-launch link, you can't buy anything, but you can follow the project so that when it does launch, you're made aware of it. And that is a very powerful tool, because if you have like a few months of that before you launch your product, that gives you a long time to start building that follow number. And if you can get it into the 500 plus area, that's an indication that your project is going to do fairly well. Then of course you launch, and Kickstarter in terms of marketing is an inversion on Amazon. So with Amazon and a lot of other marketing platforms, you want to like a gradual climb. You don't want to like have any huge crazy spikes anywhere, because then it confuses things. And they're like a nice gradual climb. Every day there's a bunch more people buying into things. Now so generally Amazon, you kind of have like a gradual climb, and then eventually it kind of peters off. With Kickstarter, it's like you flip that upside down, because you have a huge spike at the beginning, right? The first to 48 hours, a huge slump in the middle, and then another huge spike in the last 48 hours. So you want to focus all of your marketing efforts in the first 48 hours, and then, a little more effort again in the 48 hours at the end. In the middle, pretty much, you can do a few things to maintain things, but just generally don't waste your time. That's just the nature of the beast when it comes to Kickstarter. And then, of course, hopefully you fund your project, it's successful. Kickstarter will pay out 2 weeks after your campaign ends, and then you need to take that funds and fulfill your promise to your pledgers, your backers, which can involve whatever it is: writing the book, paying for editing, paying for audiobooks, paying for artists, then paying for it to be printed, or getting them coupons for print on demand, or whatever it is.
So, I mean, what kind of tiers and because you kind of give different rewards, don't you, for different levels of things? Like, what kind of tiers do you include at what levels?
It depends on if you're only starting out on Kickstarter, and you have run 5 Kickstarters, you're going to approach that in a very different way. So let's tackle the first one, because that's probably where a lot of people are going to come from. Like, this is their first Kickstarter. Your focus is on building your audience. It isn't on making a ton of money, right? I mean, your focus should never be on making a ton of money anyway. It should be providing value. But in the early stages, you want to just build the numbers of people who are buying into your stuff, into your projects. And then several projects in, you'll start to see that significantly grows. So what that means is you have a low barrier to entry when it comes to your tiers. So you're generally, people who come to your Kickstarter are like, okay, what's this person putting on the table? What does he want us to buy? Or, what's he creating? And if they're going to give you money, they're going to want something in return. So you have, let's say, for example, tier 1 could be ebook. Tier 2 could be paperback. Tier 3 could be hardcover of the novel. Tier 4 could be limited edition, leather bound, signed by the author, and that's $120. First tier could be $5, second tier could be $15, third tier could be $50. It depends. Just depends, and of course, what is the market looking for, how much it's going to cost, how much do you need to cover the expenses. You need to do all this cost analysis, of course. But yeah, you want to give them a nice selection. You generally don't want to go above 5 tiers, because then people start getting analysis paralysis and they tend to just go away, because you give them too many options. So there's something that's really cool is give us $1 or £1, and it'll get you into the pledge manager, which means you can upgrade your tier later on down the line, even after the Kickstarter has finished. And what's great about that is a lot of people don't mind putting $1 on something, because it's just $1, and that's a good way to drive your number of pledgers rather than the amount that you're going to get at the end of the campaign, which is important in the early stages.
So are there any kind of big things you see? Let's kind of stick to authors. I mean, what kind of things do you see them doing wrong, or is there anything that just kind of sticks out to you as like, no, don't do that?
Okay, something authors do wrong, and I don't understand why they do it wrong, because they do the same thing and they do it correctly when they launch books, is they try to fund, they have their funding goal set too high, right? So it's like they decide, right, it's going to actually, I want $20,000 to be able to, it's not going to be worth my while until I get $20,000, right? So I'm going to set that as my goal. Now the problem is, if you're an indie author and you don't have a huge following already, and I mean a very significant following, the chances of you hitting $20,000 isn't, those chances aren't that great. Can you do it? Yeah, you can do it, but you have to approach it in a certain way. So what happens is, very much like Amazon, if you bring an audience to Kickstarter, Kickstarter will then start to shop you around to other people, right? But the size of the audience you need to bring to Kickstarter is significantly more and in a smaller space of time than with Amazon. So Amazon's like a trickle. You can bring people, day after day after day after day, and it'll keep selling you. But Kickstarter, you need to bring everyone on day one. You want to fund your Kickstarter project in the first 24 hours if possible. Even better if it's in the first hour. So what it's a kind of a bit of a guesswork. It's a bit of a risk. But what you have to do is go, okay, I need $20,000 to make this work. I'm definitely not going to hit that on day one. But what am I going to hit on day one? Can I make 5,000 on day one? Then I need to reduce my overall limit to 5,000, because I know that if I hit the 5,000 on day one, it's going to create momentum, and I'm going to end up with that 20,000 by the end of the campaign. Now, so when you make your funding goal in day one, that triggers something on the Kickstarter algorithm, if you want to call it that, and then Kickstarter goes, oh, this is great, people love this, it funded really quickly, let's go get them more people. So authors actually do that already. Indie authors, when they're marketing, they'll generally put up a big upfront cost into a big advertising campaign when they launch, and they know at the end of it they're going to make their money back, even though there was a big investment up front. But for some reason, when it comes to Kickstarter, it's maybe because they're just not as familiar with it. It's new territory. There's a lot more reservation there. So yeah, anyone coming at it, just maybe bear that in mind.
So with the kind of, do you run like paid advertising then to this? So I know you've got the newsletter things, but how do kind of, I don't know, Facebook ads or Google ads work with this?
Yeah, so ads are important, obviously. No, I will say that, see, you get a lot of people in forums and Facebook groups on for Kickstarter, and they're like, guys, I launched our Kickstarter last week and I need help. It's not doing as well as I thought. And it's like, too late. Kill the Kickstarter, regroup, start again, right? If you don't do what you needed to do in the first 2 days, it's too late. In other words, you need to start your marketing 6 months in advance, whatever, 3 months in advance. You need to have your stuff ready to go on day one. So all of your marketing effort happens before the Kickstarter. Let's say 95% of your marketing effort happens before the Kickstarter, 5% during. So we don't run ads ourselves during the Kickstarter launch. We leave that to an advertising company, a marketing company called BackerKit. They're a lot more than a marketing company. They're very well known in the space. But if you reach a certain size, they'll work with you. They'll run the ads for you during your launch and then the rest of the campaign if it's successful. And they're much better at doing it than I could ever be, because they understand that they've been doing it for over a decade at least. So, but that said, we build our newsletter or our mailing lists using lead gen ads on Facebook for the most part, and Instagram, and we'll do that throughout the year in the lead up to, well, it's throughout the year, so it's always being built. So it means every time we come to a new campaign, we have a fresh audience or a bigger audience than we had before. Yeah, I'll leave that at that.
Awesome. Yeah, that sounds great. Yeah, well, that's been really helpful. I think there's just a lot of stuff there for authors to think about, and also just thinking about, like, we don't just have to write novels. There are other avenues where you can write and things like that. I think that's really, really cool that you've been able to do that.
Yeah, I think it just comes about thinking outside the box a little bit. So something I want to say quickly before you wrap up is, the amount of data that Kickstarter gives you is unbelievable. They give you everything. They give you, I'm not even going to list it all. Whereas a lot of other places don't give you any data. So it's incredible the amount of access you have to the data that can inform everything else you do after that point. And not only that, but when you launch your second Kickstarter or your third Kickstarter or whatever, everyone who backed you in the past will instantly get an email to let them know that you have launched another Kickstarter. So, the more you launch, the bigger your audience grows and the more people get informed of your stuff. So it's just like this thing just keeps growing and growing and becomes this monster. So there's so much, if you can think outside the box a little bit, do something different. Because the novel side of things, the literature category on Kickstarter it's still in its infancy. It's still growing. So it can be difficult to make big numbers in there, but if you bring your audience, it can be done, as Brandon Sanderson has shown us several times.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I mean, it's just really exciting. So at this point in the show, I like to ask all of our guests a few quick fire questions, let's say. So are you ready?
as I'll ever be, I guess.
Awesome. So first question, what does being indie mean to you?
Oof, okay. Well, without getting too philosophical, indie means being independent in the truest sense of the word, which means not relying on any one platform to, survive, to live, having multiple streams of income. So if one goes down, you can still be independent.
Awesome. And what one piece of advice would you give to new authors?
New authors, get your first book out there and do it now. And it's just, your first book isn't going to be perfect. You look back in 10 years and go, oh, did I write that? It's horrible. We all do it, but it has to be done. Okay, you're never going to get to that point in 10 years time without doing the first book.
Awesome. So can you recommend one book that you think all indie authors should read?
Yes, and this actually isn't specific to Kickstarter or anything else, really. It's called Millionaire Fastlane, or Fastlane Millionaire, by MJ DeMarco. And I read this about 6 or 7 years ago. And when I read it, it sounds like a really tacky, clickbaity title, right? And it is. But it's actually, it isn't like a get rich quick thing or anything. It's very, very cleverly put together, very well written. But when I read it, it flipped a switch in my head, and it helped me to broaden my scope and realize I was very narrow in where I was going, and I needed to, all this other stuff was out there, and it was there for the taking. And without that book, I probably wouldn't have reached that point.
So yeah, MJ DeMarco's Millionaire Fastlane, that is a great book, and it does sound spammy, but it's excellent. It's all about, I suppose, the different kinds of scalable businesses you can do. Really helpful. He also did another book follow up to that. I don't know if you've read that one, called Unscripted.
I have done, yeah.
Yeah, recommend that as well as a twofer with that. So let me see. So yeah, what's the biggest mistake you see authors make?
Ooh, not having a mailing list, or it's like, yeah, putting their stuff out and wondering why it's not doing well. And I take that back, and it's sort of related. The biggest mistake I see authors doing is being afraid of marketing, fearing marketing, because it's this, it's not a creative thing. It's not writing stuff down. It's not, it's not writing books. It's something else. But coming from someone who doesn't do numbers, who hates numbers, marketing, it's a necessary evil. But once you kind of get into it, you realize it isn't this scary monster. It's this little kitten. You just need to kind of stroke it, and it'll be your friend forever.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think when you put products out there, no matter what they are, you are instantly a marketing company. And I think as indie authors, we need to realize that as soon as we trying to sell a book, we are a marketing company. So final question then is, you have got a book, it's complete, you've got a cover, you've got a blurb, all that good stuff, it's edited nicely, but you've got $500 left for a launch. Where does your money go?
If you had asked me a year ago, I would say BookBub ads. Right now, I don't know what the market's like because I haven't been doing novels in a while. So I would say some form of advertising that will drive traffic to your Amazon page.
Awesome. Now that's cool. Right. Well, I want to thank you very much for giving us your time on this show. There's some really cool information. Do you want to get your website, any plugs out you want to get, anything you're doing that's cool, feel free.
Yeah, just if anyone's interested, or if anyone had any questions on Kickstarter, I'm very happy to answer them. I talk to people about it all the time, and the authors are always reaching out to me, and I just love helping people. So feel free to, I'm on Facebook as Paddy Finn. My website is paddyfinn.com. You should be able to find stuff there.
Awesome. Well, yeah, I mean, I'm sure I will be in touch because I've got some ideas for Kickstarter type things that I'm looking at. So yeah,
Sure.
that should be great. So yeah, remember you can follow Indie Author Mastermind. We are on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook. It's all Indie Author Mastermind. On the Twitter, it's just Indie Mastermind. And you can subscribe on YouTube or you can listen to the podcast. There's loads of stuff. So until next time, everyone, cheerio.